Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn, Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the show, how people adapt when familiar systems start to shift.
In education, that means rethinking what progress looks like. Not just in test scores, but in attendance, trust, and the daily experience of students and families.
We'll also look at the economy from the ground level. As hiring slows and uncertainty grows, small businesses and workers are recalibrating, figuring out what stability looks like in a changing market.
And we'll spend time walking through the spaces in between, from shared work environments designed to lower barriers for entrepreneurs, to the ways people push back against isolation during winter.
Today, we're exploring how connection, professional and personal, is being rebuilt in practical ways. This is the Metro.
We begin in Michigan's schools, which are being asked to do more than teach. They're expected to raise reading and math scores, address rising mental health needs, manage technology and discipline, and serve as safe, stable places for families under stress. In some communities, they're also absorbing fear sparked by immigration enforcement. That includes the recent detention of Detroit students seeking asylum. Academically, the picture is mixed. On national exams, Michigan's scores remain close to the U.S. average. But since the pandemic, other states have improved more quickly, particularly in early reading. Michigan has moved more slowly. Over time, that difference adds up. Meanwhile, attendance is improving, but many students still miss school regularly. That's especially true here in Detroit. The state has increased funding and continued free school meals, and educators say those steps help. They also say long-standing challenges persist in special education, staffing, and student support. This is the landscape facing Michigan's new education leader. Dr. Glenn Maleyko was sworn in last month as State Superintendent of Public Instruction. He steps into this new role after nearly a decade leading Dearborn Public Schools. So today, we're asking how he plans to lead a system being asked to do more than it was built to handle. Dr. Maleyko, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate being here, Robyn. Thank you for having me.
So, as I mentioned, you come to this job after leading Dearborn Public Schools, one of Michigan's largest and most diverse districts. I'm wondering, what did running that district teach you about schools that state-level policy debates often miss?
So the first thing I would say, it wasn't just running the district. I started as a substitute teacher, so 30 years in the Dearborn Public Schools, worked as an elementary teacher, a principal, middle and high school, and then an HR director. So all of those experience really framed my thoughts on education. And really, one of the most rewarding times was working in one of the most challenging schools with a high immigrant population, Salina, which I ended up becoming the principal of. Then spending 10 years working together, it definitely framed my viewpoint and gave me a broad perspective. I would also say that I was very active on a state level. I was president of the Michigan Superintendent Association, so it allowed me to branch out and understand from my colleagues and others, what smaller districts may be dealing with, rural districts or districts with different diversity across the state. I would tell you that I'm very excited to do the work. Those that knew me in Dearborn knew I was all about the students. I'm probably one of the most student-friendly superintendents you're going to meet. They always engage with me. I'd be with them at the football games. I'd have our student first sign going, engaging, whether it's reading in the classroom. I think it's very important. And that's what I told our Board of Education, is that despite all the politics, which we know, we're in Lansing, I'm in Lansing in my new office here, and there will be politics, but we've got to manage that so that we do put students first to ensure that we do increase student achievement, As you mentioned too, take care of the whole child. That social emotional learning is also very, very important. I heard you mention attendance and other things. So I'm very excited. I think my experience has brought in my ability to work together, to collaborate with all sorts of individuals, with groups, with legislators, with the governor's office, with the parents, with with education leaders. So I'm very excited to do the work and to continue to put students first.
Dr. Maleyko, I mean, you really have seen how the sausage is made in all of these different roles working in schools. I'm wondering, tell me about one win in Dearborn that you really like to hang your hat on.
Well, I think it's about students and putting students first, and you can talk about the accolades. Dearborn Schools has always been a leading district. I'll tell you one thing. We had a great partnership with Henry Ford College, Community College, and we had 3,800 students taking dual enrollment classes. We saved, partnership with then President Russ Cavalluna, about $20 million a year in tuition for parents. We were 20% above state averages when it came to college admission. We had a 95% graduation rate that we peaked at. And we had 6 national Blue Ribbon School Awards, which is the highest possible award you can get from the U.S. Department of Education. Now, I'm mentioning all of that, and I'm going to mention it in the frame of that we're making a difference for students. We had a very large English language learner population. And so that was something that I actually created an advocacy group. What you're going to hear coming from me, and I've already said it publicly, is that we do need to fund equity in schools. We need to fund diversity. We need to fund students that are below the poverty level, special education, and English language learners, and those diverse student populations is very important. And then we need to ensure that we're following what we call the school finance resource collaborative and making sure that we are providing adequate funding so we can do the work like increasing our literacy outcomes, our mathematic outcomes.
Yeah, I'm wondering, when you say we have to fund equity, what that means in practical terms.
So I've looked at other high achieving states, Maryland, Massachusetts, and what they've done is we have, for example, at-risk funding that comes from the state government, and it's funding that targets those students that are below the poverty level. You also have districts with English language learners. So what you're doing is you're giving additional funding to English language learners and to special education students. Special education is still not fully funded under what we call the IDEA from the federal government. Right. So I'm advocating for funding those at a higher level.
Before we move on to the work ahead, I want to stay on Dearborn Public Schools for another moment, if we could, because the schools saw a lot of controversy over book bans, sex ed, and the schools found themselves sort of at the center of culture war debates over LGBTQ-themed books. What did that experience teach you? How is that going to inform your work leading the state?
So the work we did there, and I would just say, is that we never banned books. What we did is we came up with a process to look at our books. And what we did is we listened to our local parents that had concerns about books, and we came up with a process where they could contest a certain book, maybe the level it was at. It was actually all done within the law. And we came up with committees so that the parents would have input. We also let the parents know that they had the individual opt-out for their own students, their own children. They could opt out. And what happened was we did have people, unfortunately, that were coming that weren't part of Dearborn, that were coming for political reasons. Yeah. So we had to manage that, but they were there solely for a political purpose, and they weren't there for like what our parents were there from Dearborn that we listened to, and to make sure that we took into account their ideas, their important preferences that they wanted for their students. So what I would say to you, what's helped me for that, the state level, is here's the simple answer. You're talking about the Sex Education Advisory Committee. Every district has the ability for local control. That's what we did in Dearborn. Every district has the ability to do that, and parents have opt-out. It worked in Dearborn. We never had any controversy around the Sex Education Advisory Committee. It was the books that were more the issue that came. And the reason we did is because we went through the committee and we gave parents the right to make a choice in the local area. So that informed my opinion at the state level, is that local boards have the discretion to make those choices, and individual parents have the right to opt out or not. It's their choice.
So it's very much about local control and the perspectives and prerogatives of local parents.
Correct. Because you have parents that have different values, and they're here, and they want their values and their students to be heard as well. And things that are important to them, for example, in Dearborn, may not be as important to a different culture in a different area or a different part of the state. So we try to take into account all the diversity across the state. Like I said, whether it's cultural diversity to the size of a district, to urban or rural or suburban. Those are things that values that are made at a local level. And so they totally have the ability to make those choices.
Now, Dr. Maleyko, from leading Dearborn Public Schools to your new role as State Superintendent of Public Instruction, could you explain what decisions actually run through your office and what decisions don't, even though people might assume they do?
Well, as we mentioned, we're a local control state. So I think a lot of times, they think I have ability and oversight over the boards, and there is compliance issues. We have responsibility to distribute money and make sure that districts are in compliance. We also have the responsibility to lead. What I can tell you is when I first got on the job, it is much different than a local. You should see the amount of things I have to approve. I'm in all these meetings and we're going through, and my name gets put on a lot of things for approvals, and it's part of the process. So what I would tell you is that my understanding of running a local district for 10 plus years is invaluable for me here as I'm working through some of the processes, because I have an understanding at the local level. I was there. I was in the trenches working with everyone. But I can tell you, I have a lot of learning. I'm going to be honest. I have a lot of learning at the state level. There's a great team here at the Michigan department. That's my first learning, is building I'm all about collaboration, working together. And what you're going to see of me is I'm planning to take a tour around the state to listen to different people across the state of Michigan. We're also planning for like a full week up in the Upper Peninsula later in the spring. And I plan to go out to interact with all school stakeholders. And I'm really excited to interact with the students. I'm a big social media user for positive things, and I love interacting with the students. And so what I can tell you is that, I have a massive responsibility, but we have a great team here at the Michigan department. We have a great Board of Education. I am so excited to work in collaboration with them. And I think everyone already knows that that's been my message. We're going to revisit the top 10 plan in the future. And sometime this year,
Dr. Maleyko, if I could jump in,
go
let's remind folks that top 10 plan. Michigan's education goals have been framed in national rankings, and there has been this long-term ambition of making Michigan a top 10 education state. How do you balance a long-term goal like that with the day-to-day improvements that actually change a student's life?
So what I would say is, obviously you got to make it, you're dealing with students every day and in the district. And it's very important to make a difference for each individual student. But long-term, I would say it's a marathon, not a sprint. The Michigan Department, the State Board of Education, the legislator, the governor have already implemented the dyslexia and literacy law. And part of that law has letters training for elementary teachers. And we also have...
And that training is to give teachers a better handle on early literacy instruction. Is that right?
Correct. It's working on the science of reading at a high level. Mm-hmm. I am calling for a mandate on this for all elementary teachers, preschool or kindergarten to grade 6, and possibly even preschool. Although we'd have to work with the Maleyko administration over there. I do believe that it's very important. I think everyone is getting behind it. I've talked to legislators, Republicans, Democrats. The governor and I had a joint summit just before the holiday break, where we brought 300 educational leaders from across the state to talk about what we need to do with literacy to improve outcomes for the benefit of students. So there's a lot of momentum going on, but we also need to make improvements where needed. So what I'm going to say is the marathon is stay the course. We have the law that is very effective. Our board supports it. Let's continue to move forward. And that training and providing the materials is going to be essential to make a difference for those students.
Why the science of reading? Why is that the direction that you're going in?
Well, it's just very important. I mean, we know that literacy is at the foundation of everything. Yeah. I go into a class, for example, and I read in the March is Reading Month or any other time of the year, and they say, "Hey, he's a doctor," and the elementary students, they don't know. Well, no, you're not going to go to me when you're sick or anything like that, which they don't. And it's really positive. I love going reading. I say it's about reading. I'm a PhD. It's about the ability. I read a lot. Well, it's very critical if students want to be successful in elementary school to middle to high school that they are literate. I mean, that is an essential skill. So that's why we need to all get behind this. The governor is, the state board, the legislator. If we can't do that, then students aren't going to graduate from college or find other career choices. I would also say CTE is a great option for students, but literacy
career training
and technical training. Sorry that I used the acronym there. Career and technical careers. That's another partnership we have in Dearborn. We had a Michael Berry Career Center. We have a lot of different. We opened a cybersecurity classes. We have culinary arts, all sorts of different kind of careers that we partner. So those are also potentials for students, but all of those require literacy. And so that's why we all need to get behind this. This is not controversial. We need to get behind it, put the money behind it, continue to do so. The state has already started with that 2024 law. Let's continue to focus on it with the great work that's going on at local districts and MDE, and then recognize that we also can make improvements. Providing this training will help us get to that end objective of making a difference.
My guest is Dr. Glenn Maleyko, Michigan's State Superintendent of Public Instruction. We're talking about where Michigan schools stand, why recovery after the pandemic has been uneven, and what it will take to move forward. When we come back, we'll talk attendance and technology in Michigan schools. This is The Metro. I'm Robyn Vincent. Stay with us. On WDET, I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest today is Dr. Glenn Maleyko, Michigan's new State Superintendent of Public Instruction. We're talking about the massive work ahead leading the state. Dr. Maleyko, I want to look at attendance because when we think about the massive work ahead, all of these initiatives really putting the focus on reading, for example, is not something that we can do unless we have enough kids in the classroom, regularly attending class. And we know chronic absenteeism is still high in the state, and that's especially true here in Detroit, where roughly 60% of kids are frequently missing class. And I should mention that number does represent improvement from recent years, but it's still very high. When districts talk to you about why students are missing school, what do they say?
Well, what I would say is this, we're several years out of the pandemic, but we know that changed the world.
Yeah.
And the whole attendance process got changed, with virtual to other things that were going on. It's very important that we have students in school if we want to make those advancements in achievement. And, it's challenging. I think I heard your intro. Schools are doing a lot. They're doing everything. They're there to provide, so in the community, a support. I mean, students that need food on the table. That's why the free and reduced lunch programs are so important. Students that need dental or medical or other assistance. You talked about immigrant students that come in and their parents are just looking to have, food on the table. And so they need support from the schools and community areas. And
Dr. Maleyko, if I could jump in for just one moment, do you think schools are doing too much, or is this the future of education? Is schools becoming this very strong community hub?
I mean, I think they are becoming a strong community hub. They have been for a long time, but it's ever increasing.
Yeah.
The jobs of educators and teachers much more challenging for principals because they are wearing all of those hats that you mentioned. It's very challenging, but that's why we all kind of got to come together in collaboration and work together. There's some community schooling models that can be supportive. In Dearborn, we did community in schools, and we had staff there supported, some of it by the Balmer Philanthropic Foundation, where we were able to have staff that provided those supports. Sometimes we'd have a food drive for the students in the community. So I think those are very important. I know, like in Dearborn, what we did, and these are things as I've come to the state. There's a process called EWIMS, Early Warning Intervention Model, that the state has been implementing. And what we're doing is we're bringing together different examples of effective intervention when you have attendance or social emotional learning issue. One of the things that we talked about at the last state board meeting, the Teacher of the Year, about what we call trauma-informed instruction. And what that is it's connecting teachers better to the students and providing a higher level of training for teachers so they can connect with the students. They can understand better of what the students are dealing with and to build really those positive relationships. You know, the relationships and the connection, like I'm a big sports person. Hockey is my thing. I'm a diehard Detroit fan through and through, and I'm a Wayne State U graduate, by the way. I heard you guys mention that. And here, I was connected of leadership because of that connection. So we've got to connect students to schools, whether it's sports or the arts or whatever it might be, and to keep them in school. And I think we got to understand what they're dealing with in the home as well, and that's what that training does.
I derailed you, though, Dr. Maleyko,
Oh,
because
okay.
we were talking about chronic absenteeism. So I want to go back to that. And
Sure.
the point is not lost on me that, yes, schools are doing more and more. And it sounds like what you're saying is that is the place to support families and communities, that schools can and should be that place for connection. But when we talk about chronic absenteeism, I mean, it's connected to the idea of making a school a place of connection, making a school a place where kids and families want to be. But talk about some of the systemic factors when it comes to chronic absenteeism. I mean, that's something we discuss when we look at the problem in Detroit schools. And I'm guessing that these are problems that stretch across the state.
Sure. I mean, and that's why, like we said, you want to connect with the students and you need to have someone that's looking after or understands what that student's dealing with. For example, an intervention model where you're tracking students. Let's just use the high school as an example. You can have an intervention model where you're tracking to make sure students are on track for graduation. And you have someone, whether that be a counselor or an interventionist or an adult, that has the responsibility to make those calls and make that connection with not only the student, but with the family. One of the things I've been a proponent of, going back to my time as both a teacher and a principal, is home visits. Home visits can go a lot of way of developing relationship. I did it as a teacher. I used to have to bring translators to help me with students in the home that their family spoke Arabic and they couldn't speak English.
Dr. Maleyko, that sounds like asking a lot of teachers, though, and it has me thinking about something else I wanted to ask you, which is the fact that Michigan has invested in teacher recruitment and mentoring, yet many educators continue to leave. And are we asking too much of teachers right now? I mean, what's driving teachers to leave, would you say?
Well, like I said, it's more and more challenging in the classroom. I think society has changed post-pandemic, and what I always advocate is for civility, working in a positive. Teachers have families too. They have children. They have their own concerns with their parents, their husbands, their wives, their brothers and sisters. So we've got to understand we're all people. Superintendents as well. It's very challenging for local superintendents today's day and age. So what I always say is we kind of have to have an understanding there that everyone's just people trying to do the work. And so that's why my advocacy is collaboration and working with all stakeholders, that can be the business community, that can be the parents and the PTA, and working together. And what I would say, because your question was about the reduction and I am proud that Michigan has made that investment in retention and recruitment, but we have to compensate our teachers as well. And so like when we want to have letters training, which we talked about for the science of reading, we have to provide time for that and proper compensation. I would say too that we're also through our top 10 plan, we're addressing this issue, and we want to continue to do that. And I mentioned that I want to revisit the top 10 plan, but I believe these are areas that we can continue to move forward on.
I mean, when we talk about all that teachers take on, it has me thinking about special education teachers, especially. I realize that special ed is a constant source of frustration for families and districts. Parents often describe the process as slow and adversarial. When you hear that, what do you think the system is getting wrong?
Well, I think there's a lot of good people. It's very challenging in special education. That is why we also had different incentives and contracts and bonuses to get people to go into special education. I give them a lot of credit, special ed teachers. When I go into the classrooms, and they are doing the greatest work, providing students with the education they need. But we do have to partner with parents in working together. It is something I want to look at the state level, where we look at special education, not just from what we call a compliance issue, but a student outcome. I did do some work going back to my time in Dearborn and what we call the special education co-teaching model, and providing additional support where you would have a special education teacher working collaboratively with a regular education teacher. But as you mentioned, you have to work and you have to partner with parents. I'm going to give a shout out. Mr. Mike Asaley, our executive director of Special Pops, did a great job. Him and his team in Dearborn, outstanding. They partnered with parents. Sometimes you're going to have differing opinion, but ultimately parents are there because they want their children to have a high quality education. They want better for their children as they go through the school system and graduate. And so that's what we have to understand. But on the part of parents, they also have to understand too that it's very challenging for the teachers. So that's where we both have to kind of be empathetic on each other, because ultimately we're here to work together for the children, right? But we have to understand there's challenges on all ends. And when we do that and we collaborate together with parents, that's where we're most effective. But we do need the funding. I still believe, I'm going to advocate a resolution we've had resolutions at the local district for fully funding special education at the federal level. So we need to continue to work on those areas, because we do need to keep, and I support what the legislature has done with the Grow Your Own and the ability to have teachers get their education paid for to become a teacher and to even be paid so that they can go into those areas. Those are the kind of programs that are going to be helpful long term.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest is Dr. Glenn Maleyko, Michigan's new state superintendent of public instruction. Now, Dr. Maleyko, some of the biggest pressure points in schools right now aren't really about standards or funding. They're about everyday rules. One place that tension shows up is around cell phones. Lawmakers declined to set a statewide rule on cell phones, leaving districts to decide. From your vantage point, is that flexibility helpful, or does it leave schools fighting the same battle over and over?
So overall, I still want to say that I'm here for the literacy, for mathematics, and focus on those areas. And I don't want to be distracted per se, but we do know the research that, and I've been in the classrooms. I made over 400 school visits a year on average during my tenure in Dearborn. So I would be walking through classrooms, school visits. When the students pull out a cell phone, it is a distraction. Yeah. So I think there's maybe a happy medium. I believe there's still some talk with the legislature about cell phones. I think there's a way to not have cell phones during instructional time and to come up with it so there's a compromise on this issue, because I do see both sides of it. I also see the parents that during an emergency situation, they would want to have contact with their child. So I think there's some compromising, but what I would say is that they are a distraction if cell phones are pulled out during instructional time. It's a distraction for the students, and then it doesn't lead to effective instruction.
And I did hear you there use the word distraction, that you don't want to be distracted from some of your larger focus areas, which, of course, are reading and science and math. But we can't talk about technology in the classroom and how it's affecting learning without also discussing artificial intelligence. So while I have you, I mean, AI is already shaping how students write and research and solve problems, often faster than school policy can keep up. And we know some educators see AI as a powerful support for learning, but others worry it could really widen gaps or undermine core skills. What's the most important decision Michigan needs to make right now about how AI is used in schools?
So I would say this is, we know AI is not going away. It's just like years ago, you talk about the cell phone or the ability to use computers even. I remember years ago when I first started, there was resistance just to the computers and things like that, right? Technology in general. But it's not going. So what we need to do is embrace it, but use it properly and make sure that our teachers and our administrators are trained properly. We did some training when I was at the local level for our administrators. We partnered with Michigan Virtual University on some training that will continue to occur. And I think that we understand there's a place for it. But we got to be careful with it. And I do think that when you develop policy, you've got to understand that. I mean, every other time when technology has changed, we'd have to have policies that are adaptable to fit the current need. But we cannot run away from it. We can't just ban it. We have to embrace it, but embrace it used in a proper manner. I know Mr. Boffman from the Michigan Virtual had talked about we talked about the equity and, children that are under the poverty level or disadvantaged students. There's trainings out there for how you can leverage AI to support students that have those challenges. So if we embrace it and we do it in the proper manner, I think that's where it'll be effective. We cannot disregard it. We need to understand that it's here, but we need to be cautious with it. And that's why we need our educators involved in making these decisions and policies and whatnot.
So it's about putting up the proper guardrails and understanding, as you mentioned, AI is not going away. It is going to be more and more pervasive in our lives. I want to pivot to another kind of challenge that schools are facing, and it's one that you already noted. In Detroit, students seeking asylum were detained by ICE, and that created a lot of fear that has rippled into schools. Dr. Maleyko, when families are afraid to send their children to class, what responsibility does the education system have, and where are its limits?
Well, I mean, students first, right? So when I come back to it as a principal or as a superintendent, I'm putting students first. My objective as an educator, I don't want to get into the broader political things that are surrounding that question per se. But what I do want to say is that we have an obligation to support the students. And that's what we do. And that's what our administrators are trained to do. And that's what I did in Dearborn as well with our administrators, to train them to how to properly support those students when they may be going through these situations. We come back to, what do? We put the best interests of the students at the forefront. We make sure our administrators are trained as to what legally they can and cannot do. And then you provide support to the family as much as possible. We would do that regardless of any situation. We talk about students that may have other challenges in the household. Well, we're still going to provide support. That's what educators do, is we put the students first and we make sure that we're taking care of the students. That is our primary responsibility. We're not involved in the broader political issues.
You have used this term quite a bit. This is something you champion, students first, but it still feels a bit amorphous to me. Can you give me some more concrete examples of what it means in your eyes, the idea of students first?
So one example is the Student Advisory Council listening to our students. Student voice matters. We have some brilliant students. So listening to the student ideas, that's one of the things that I did over my time. And that's why the students used to love getting in selfies with me and little videos. They actually trained me on how to use social media, by the way. They used to tell me, these long videos, we're not watching.
The students trained you.
The students did. The students trained me. I'm a very big social media user. I've learned all my techniques from them.
I see you have over 7,000 followers on Instagram. I'm impressed.
Yeah. And we just launched a new state Instagram site. I believe it's Bob, is it student first at Michigan Department of Education. We're very excited to get that going. So I would tell you this, I had students sitting at the table. They helped me make some massive changes. We upped our food services model in Dearborn, and it all started from the students on my advisory council. So I would have students that were part of this council that would meet with me regularly. They would be texting me via WhatsApp chat so that they could communicate with me. And then they were doing things to take initiative in a positive manner to help other students. I have an advisory council as state superintendent from students across the state. Most of our meetings obviously are going to be virtual, but we will also have some in person. So this is what you do is you have to really listen to your students and make their voice matter. And so that's one of the things that I would say, you talked about, here's a really good example. I'll just say, we can learn from our students, and that's what gives me great hope. When a lot of that was going on in my district, the meetings about the books and things like that, yeah. I had my students that day. I had a meeting just before part 2 of the big meeting where 1,300 people showed up. And what they said to me is, look, we don't have an issue with these things. And, the way some of the adults are behaving, we don't feel safe and we don't want to come to these meetings. Can you tell them that they're not being very good role models for us? I mean, that's something we really need to reflect on as adults. The students, we can learn from them. They're trying to say no, civility, right? And I went and said that right at that board meeting that night with 1,300 people coming into that board meeting. And there were people that were not very nice. There were others who were there in a positive manner. But I said what the students said. We can learn from our students. We need to work together and empower them. I've taken students to me at national conference to present and co-present on specific topic areas in education.
So it is about listening. It's listening to students who can remind us of our purpose, it sounds like, in this situation especially. Before I let you go, Dr. Maleyko, I want to zoom out now from the classroom to the systems that have been in place to regulate education. There's active political debate about the federal Department of Education, including President Trump's executive order to dismantle it and a bipartisan federal bill that would formally terminate the department. We know that some of the issues with this happen to be weakening civil rights enforcement. Special education oversight could be on the chopping block, and student loan services, to name a few. How do you see changes at the federal level affecting Michigan schools and the Department of Education's role here?
So I was in Washington in July, and this was when the federal Title II, $3, and $4 were being held up. I was part of the the National Superintendent Association Governing Board. And I was with my colleague superintendents. I was with a Michigan delegation, and I was with delegation from different states across the nation. And we met with Republicans and Democratic offices in Washington. We spent about 9 hours on Capitol Hill. And what we said is that the politics doesn't matter. Whether you're in a red or a blue district, the cuts to these funding are going to hurt all students. They're going to hurt from the rural district to the larger district. And these are going to be the impact when we have to lay off staff and we can't provide those interventionists. If we want to increase intervention and increase absenteeism and our absentee rates, improve it, and if we want to increase literacy outcomes, we need to fund it appropriately. So when we're making those decisions to cut funding, it is going to be counterproductive to our overall mission of putting students first. So that was my message. And we had superintendents from different districts, different sizes, saying the same thing. And we were all unified in our message. Shortly thereafter, guess what? It did have an impact. And I commend the legislators on both sides because they did, the administration, they were urged by the Republicans and the Democrats to release the funding, and they did. The federal, and that funding was already pre-approved by Congress. You talked about IDEA. Well, that's in the books. That's a law that's already there. So we need to make sure we're following the rules, and we need to actually increase that. So I think it's very essential that we remember this is going to hurt a student when you take such action.
Meaning cutting the Department of Education, that it is going to have deep cascading effects for students.
Well, I would just say that, I think they're going to rely more on state departments of education, like the Michigan Department is what's happening in a lot of these areas as funding is cut. One of the things I was very disappointed in, and I'll be honest, is the cut of the National Blue Ribbon School. I mentioned to you about the 6 that we received. That program got totally cut. We want to champion educators and we want to continue to have them come into the profession. Why don't we want to continue to acknowledge that was not a costly program? That was a program where you recognized schools that were making a difference. So here's an example. The Michigan Department, this was prior to me coming officially, but I was so pleased they already had it going. Again, we have a great team here at MDE. They already had a solution for how to recognize schools at the state level. And they did that at the November board meeting. So I was very pleased to see that. Those kind of things are going to hurt education ultimately. And that's just one example.
So there's going to be more weight on states, more weight on state departments of education, it sounds like.
Correct. Yes.
Dr. Glenn Maleyko, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, thank you for spending so much time with me today.
You're very welcome. I wish you all the best and keep up the mission, and go Wayne State.
Go Warriors.
Yeah, there you go. Take care.
It's the Metro on WDET. Coming up, unemployment has ticked up. What does this mean for small business workers and owners in Michigan? We'll talk about that next. Stay with us.